Welcome to the public workshop for the City of El Cerrito's 2023-2031 Housing Element Update. My name is Matt Gelman. I'm part of the consultant team helping the city prepare the Housing Element Update. And go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Before we go too much further, I wanted to let you know more about what to expect this evening. We do have some brief opening remarks, including this, which will be followed by a presentation to provide an overview of the housing element. The presentation includes a summary of recent trends and housing needs that set the context for the housing element, as well as a summary of the site's inventory and housing capacity, an overview of fair housing assessment, an introduction of the goals, policies, and implementation programs, what we call the housing plan. All of those are included in the housing element, and we want to share more about all of those, and we have quite a lot to share. At the end of this presentation, we'll discuss next steps for the housing element, including City Council review and HCD certification of the housing element. And our goal this evening is to get through the material in about a half hour and spend the rest of the time answering your questions and hearing from you. We're recording this presentation tonight, and we'll make a copy of the recording as well as the slides available on the project website as soon as we can after the meeting. So a couple more housekeeping slides. Next slide, please. Sean, turn it over to you here.
Great, thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Sean Moss. I'm the city's planning manager. We have some other city staff here with us today as well. We have Melanie Mintz, our community development director, Aisa Shuri, the city's housing manager, and Diego Romero, the city's assistant planner. Our consultant team from Ascent will be walking you through most of this presentation, but I did just want to introduce the city staff team as well as kind of give some very brief opening remarks. Our team from Ascent will dive into this overview more thoroughly. But I just kind of wanted to, establish a framework for why we're here tonight. So as I'm sure most of you know, there is a very great demand for need for additional housing in our region and in our city. And if we don't plan for the needs of our future housing needs, we really stand to exacerbate some of the current issues that we're facing as far as housing. So we're here tonight to plan for our future housing needs. The housing element is one of the required elements or chapters in our general plan, and the city is required to update it periodically. So that's generally what you'll be hearing about tonight. I want to highlight before we start some other ongoing projects that are ongoing right now. The first is the San Pablo Avenue specific plan update. So you'll hear more about this in the course of the presentation, but our San Pablo Avenue specific plan is the document and the plan that establishes the vision for the development of the San Pablo Avenue corridor. That plan was adopted in 2014, and the city is currently doing an update to the plan. We have an upcoming meeting. I'll go back over all of these meetings at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to start off by highlighting these projects. Additionally, you may have heard of the development project, the transit-oriented development project at the El Cerrito Plaza BART station. There's an upcoming meeting for that in September. And then also the city will be looking at a revision to our safety element, which is another required element or chapter of the general plan. The safety element deals with a lot of things: climate adaptation, evacuation routes, just safety as far as hazards, earthquakes, fires, et cetera, things that have the potential to affect safety in our community. So we will be starting that effort soon, later this year as well. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it back over to Matt.
Thanks, Sean. And if we could go to the next slide, just wanted to share a little bit about how to participate tonight. So if you have questions or comments anytime during the workshop, you can use the Zoom chat feature. If you're on a desktop, you can find that at the bottom with the chat icon. If you're on a mobile device, you might have to look for the 3 dots and the more. Once you click that, it'll give you the ability to type in a message and send that to everyone in the meeting tonight. At the end of the meeting, as I mentioned, we will have some time for public comment to talk with you, answer your questions, and hear your feedback about the plan. So that's how to participate tonight. And then on the next slide, just wanted to share more about how you can share your comments. First, there's public comment period on the housing element that concludes on August 29th. So if you have additional comments as we're going through the material and want to take some time to write a formal comment, please email planning@ci.l-cerrito.ca.us. The housing element itself was released on Friday, the 29th of July. So that's available to download and review on the housing element update website, and the URL is up on the slide there, elcerrito.org/housing element 2023. And then there is a city council meeting where we will be giving an update on similar to this on August 16th, 2022. So look out for that. And with that, I think we can go ahead and launch into our presentation about the housing element.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. Good evening, my name is Chelsea Payne, Director of Urban Design and Planning at Ascent, and I'm going to be leading you through tonight's presentation, starting with an overview of the housing element. Recognizing that housing is one of California's most critical issues, the state requires all cities and counties in California to prepare a housing element and to do their part to help meet the statewide housing needs. As Sean mentioned, the housing element, it's a mandatory element of the city's general plan. And it's a document that guides decisions about how the city will develop and how the city will plan for housing. The housing element assesses both local and regional housing needs. It's about not only meeting the existing El Cerrito housing needs, but the fair share of the regional future housing needs. Cities and counties are required to update their housing elements every 8 years according to a state mandated schedule. And the deadline for El Cerrito's housing element and for all other housing elements in the Bay Area is January 31st, 2023. And we're going to be doing our very best to adopt as close to that deadline as we can. The housing element is the only element of the general plan that's reviewed and certified by the state for compliance with state law. And the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, is the state department that's responsible for that compliance review. The draft housing element that was published last week, it includes all of the content that's required by state law. So it's quite a lengthy document with all of these different types of analyses that are mandated by state law. It starts with chapter 1, the introduction. And this chapter describes the purpose, the organization of the document, and it summarizes the community engagement efforts that led up to release of the draft housing element. Chapter 2 is the housing needs assessment, and it contains detailed demographic data and trends to describe the housing needs of El Cerrito residents. Chapter 3, this meets a new state law requirement to prepare a fair housing assessment. And this chapter contains very detailed analysis of trends related to housing discrimination, patterns of residential segregation based on race and income, displacement risk, and access to opportunities. Chapter 4 contains the city's sites inventory, and this chapter describes the city's assigned housing target, which is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. And it contains a detailed inventory of the land where there's opportunity for housing to be built in order to meet that housing target. Chapter 5 analyzes potential constraints to housing in an effort to reduce barriers to housing development. And then chapter 6 describes opportunities for energy conservation. And finally, chapter 7 is the housing plan. This is really the heart of the document. It contains the goals, policies, and the programs for how the city will address its housing needs. We spent the months of April and May conducting community engagement on the housing element. We held our first community workshop on April 26th. We had about 24 people in attendance. We also distributed an online survey and received about 215 responses. The city promoted the survey and the workshop through the project website, emails, flyers, Facebook, Twitter, through the city manager's update, and then distribution to residents of existing affordable housing in the city. So maybe you've also heard about this workshop through those same methods. The housing element summarizes all of the feedback that we heard from the community. And some of the key things we heard was general support for building affordable housing, concerns around gentrification, constraining factors to development like the high development fees and construction costs. And then we heard other concerns related to safety, building design, and resources for people that are experiencing homelessness. And all of those comments are detailed in the housing element. One of the key takeaways from the survey feedback is that homeowners and renters experience very different housing issues. As I mentioned, we received 215 responses, and 80% of those were from homeowners. Only about 18% were from renters, and there were a few other responses. But this graph shows the percentage of responses for homeowners versus renters. And most homeowners responded that they were not experiencing any housing issues. At 65%, that's the bar shown in that dark red color. Very few renters, though, said that they were not experiencing issues. Only 10% of renters claimed that. The most important issue for homeowners was lack of funding to make necessary home repairs. About 25% of homeowners responded. And then the most important issue for renters was that they wanted to move, but can't find or afford a home that meets their needs. So a lack of housing choice. That was 74% of renters responded that way. And the input that we received from the community through these means was used to inform the understanding of the housing needs and the priorities of residents, and was used as we developed the housing plan and the responses, policies, and the programs. I'm now going to touch on some key facts from our housing needs analysis. We look at growth trends in El Cerrito, and over the past decade, El Cerrito's population has grown by just 1,400 residents, from about 23,000 in 2010 to around 25,000 in 2020. It's an average of about 140 new residents each year. And the city has grown at a much slower rate than the county and the Bay Area averages. The housing stock in El Cerrito, like most communities in California, is predominantly made up of single-family homes. Single-family homes make up 71% of the housing stock. And the city does have slightly more multifamily housing. 28% of the housing stock in El Cerrito is multifamily, compared to the countywide average of 24%. But as many of you know, that much of the new housing capacity, what's expected in the future, is more multifamily. So we would expect that percentage to increase in the future. As for home values in the city, they've generally followed regional trends, increasing significantly in recent years. And the median sale price in El Cerrito in March 2022 was over $1.1 million. Rents have also been increasing in the city and throughout the region. This chart shows that renters would need to make about $6,500 a month, or the equivalent of $37 an hour, to afford the average asking rent of $1,952 a month in Contra Costa County. And that's about 2.5 times the California minimum wage of $14 an hour. You can see here several professions that are outlined that aren't making enough money to comfortably afford the average asking rent in the county. So people working as home health and personal care aides, in retail sales, child care workers, they would need to pay more than half of their monthly income on rent. So when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing that's affordable to low, very low, and extremely low income households, so that they're paying no more than 30% of their income on housing. And these income limits are determined by the state based on the area median income and different household sizes. And this table here shows the income limits for households in Contra Costa County. So in Contra Costa County, a one-person household earning $76,000 a year would be considered low income and could afford to pay about $1,900 each month on housing. A three-person household with a gross income of about $37,000 or less is considered an extremely low-income household and could afford to pay about $925 for housing each month. So that gives you some parameters about what we mean about affordable housing. Households that pay more than 30% of their income on housing are considered cost burdened. The cost burdened households are shown here in dark blue. And then a household is considered to be severely cost burdened if they're paying more than 50% of their income on housing, and that's shown in the light blue color. Overpayment or cost burden is much more common for renter households than for homeowner households in El Cerrito and just generally across the state. Almost half of renters in the city, 46%, are cost burdened, or they're overpaying for housing, compared to 29% of homeowners in El Cerrito. Cost burden is an even greater issue for residents at the lower end of the income scale. So what's shown here is that 81% of extremely low income households, those are those earning less than 30% of the area median income, or AMI, 81% are overpaying for housing, with 70% severely cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than half of their income on housing. And that's compared to about 11% of households that are earning above the area median income. With rent increases, with these recent increases in housing costs, we're also seeing an increase in the population of people experiencing homelessness across the state. And this chart here shows the estimated number of people experiencing homelessness at the time of the countywide point in time count. And this is a survey that's conducted on a single night generally during the month of January. In 2020, about 2,200 people countywide were estimated to be homeless the night of that January point in time count. And at that time, the estimate for El Cerrito was 24 unsheltered individuals. The most recent point in time count was conducted in February 2022, and there was a 35% increase with over 3,000 unhoused people counted. And we don't yet have data on the survey for El Cerrito, but when we do, we'll be including that information in the housing element. Next, I'm going to talk about one of the central pieces of the housing element, which is the regional housing needs allocation that's assigned to the city. And I'm going to talk about a summary of the housing capacity that's included in the site's inventory. In California, housing needs are assessed at a regional level based on projected population growth and several other factors. And a regional housing target or a determination is assigned by the state, by HCD, to each region. And then the regional government, and in this region, that's ABAG, or the Association of Bay Area Governments. ABAG is assigned with developing a methodology to distribute the regional housing needs to every jurisdiction. This process is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or the RHNA. So HCD assigned the ABAG region over 440,000 housing units to be accommodated over the roughly 8-year planning period of this housing element. And based on the methodology that was adopted by ABAG, El Cerrito's portion of that regional housing need is just under 1,400 housing units. So this nearly 1,400 housing unit target is broken down by the income levels that are shown here that I described earlier. And you can see how the RHNA for this housing element, the 2023 to 2031, compares to the city's current housing element RHNA that's shown on the left. It's nearly 3.5 times the current RHNA. The lower income RHNA, which is the very low and the low income categories combined, is about 38% of the RHNA, so 526 units of lower income housing. And these are the income categories that are typically the hardest to meet for communities around the state. So a lot of attention in the site's inventory is on how cities are meeting the lower income RHNA. Now, cities don't build housing, but cities do regulate where and what type of housing can be built through zoning. And in the housing element, the city is obligated to show that there is enough available land that's appropriately zoned to allow for a variety of different housing types to be built. And so in the housing element, we prepare an inventory of all of the vacant and underutilized sites where there's potential for new housing to be built in the future. And we classify each site based on the income level that can be accommodated on that site. And the most important factor in how we inventory sites is density. Density is a measure of how many housing units are allowed per acre of land. And typically, the higher the density, the more affordable the housing becomes. And according to state law for El Cerrito, sites that have zoning that allows for at least 30 units per acre can be counted as meeting the lower income RHNA. So 30 units per acre is the typical density for a 2 to 3 story apartment building. And the San Pablo Avenue specific plan area allows for densities much higher than 30 units per acre. So the available sites within that specific plan area can all count toward meeting the lower income RHNA. On the other end of the spectrum, land that is zoned for only single family homes generally gets credited toward the above moderate income RHNA. Land zoned for medium densities generally gets credited toward the moderate income RHNA. So that's how the site's inventory methodology works. So what we count toward meeting the city's RHNA are projects that are approved and in the pipeline. We count the capacity on vacant and underutilized sites, and we also count a projection of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. So on the first topic, what we mean by pipeline projects are housing developments that have been approved and are entitled, but haven't yet been issued building permits. And for these approved projects, we credit the unit toward the income categories based on the actual projected rents or sales prices of the unit. So that 30 unit per acre rule of thumb I mentioned, that doesn't apply to projects at the point that they've been approved. We only inventory 100% deed restricted affordable units that are in the pipeline toward meeting that lower income RHNA. But that 30 units per acre rule of thumb, it does apply to the vacant and underutilized sites that don't have approved projects on them. So as I mentioned, we identify all sites that are either vacant or are underutilized, meaning that they might have an existing structure, but they have a significant opportunity to redevelop during the planning period. And we describe why that's the case in the housing element. And we classify each of those sites by income level based on the allowed density. And then finally, state law allows us to credit towards the RHNA a reasonable projection of how many accessory dwelling units we expect to be built during the planning period. And ADUs, these are units that can generally be built on a single family parcel. This is sometimes in the backyard, sometimes above a garage. So we look at recent building permit trends and we project that forward and we count that towards meeting the RHNA. So those are all the things we count in our inventory. And this is the site's inventory map. It shows all of the approved projects in brown, all of the sites in the inventory based on the zoning. You can see the San Pablo Avenue specific plan areas. That's the area shown in purple. You see a lot of scattered sites sort of up in the hillside area. These are mostly scattered sites where single family homes can be built. Most of the housing capacity in the city is within the San Pablo Avenue specific plan area, as I mentioned. And that's the area that applies along San Pablo Avenue for the entire length of the city. There's been a lot of development activity in this area in the past few years. Several recently completed projects, many that are currently under construction, and then several more in the pipeline. 91% of the city's RHNA is within the specific plan area, and this includes over 1,500 units in planned and approved projects, and about 1,000 units on vacant and underutilized sites. I'm just going to highlight a couple of the more significant developments that are counted. The first is phase 2 of Mayfair Station. This is one of the approved projects that's in the specific plan area. And this site was previously used as a surface parking lot for the BART station. And phase 2 of the project, which was approved in August 2017, is a 100% deed restricted affordable housing with a total of 69 units. And then the most significant of the new projects in the specific plan area is the El Cerrito Plaza BART TOD, or Transit Oriented Development Project. And the planning and development effort for this project is still underway, but the proposed development concept anticipates 769 total units, with about half of those being market rate units, about 112 moderate income units, 196 low income units, and 70 very low income units. And the details on this project, as well as the other pipeline projects, are all described in the draft housing element. So this table, which is in the housing element, shows a summary of the site's inventory compared to the city's housing target, or the RHNA. So the RHNA is shown on the top line, and then the total capacity in the inventory is shown in the second row from the bottom. The housing element sites inventory includes capacity for over 2,800 total housing units, including 906 units in the lower income categories. And you can see here we've identified a surplus in all income categories. The city is required by state law to maintain sufficient capacity to meet the RHNA throughout the planning period. So the housing element includes a program for the city to monitor its sites inventory, track each of these sites as projects are approved, and ensure that sufficient capacity is maintained through the entire 8-year planning period. So that wraps up the sites inventory. I'm going to talk next about one of the most significant new requirements of this housing element update, and that's the requirement to address fair housing issues. Assembly Bill 686 is a new law that requires all public agencies in California to administer housing and community development programs in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing. And this means taking meaningful actions to combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive communities where everyone has equal access to opportunities. In the housing element, we're required to prepare a fair housing assessment that analyzes the 5 categories of topics that are shown here. So fair housing enforcement and outreach capacity of the city, trends, both local and regional trends related to segregation and integration, racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, disparities in who has access to opportunity within the region, within each local jurisdiction, and then disproportionate housing needs and displacement risk. So chapter 3 contains a very detailed fair housing assessment in compliance with state law requirements. One of the key things that we look at in the fair housing assessment is access to opportunity. And access to opportunity refers to geographic access to goods, resources, and services that offer people, particularly low-income individuals, the best chance at economic advancement and high educational attainment and good physical and mental health. And when we're referring to access to opportunity, different areas are generally described as either high resource or low resource. And areas of high resource, those are the areas on the east side of El Cerrito and the hillside, and to the south of El Cerrito, the areas shown in the blue and the dark blue. These are the areas that are considered to have the highest access to educational, economic, and environmental opportunity. These are maps that are prepared by the state for use in the housing element and for use in state funding programs. Areas that are in teal, this is a majority of El Cerrito, are considered moderate resource, and then areas in that light green color, which includes a portion of the city, most of Richmond to the north, are considered low resource. And so AB 686 requires cities across the state to consider how they can ensure equal access to opportunity and help low-income residents and residents of color prosper. Another factor that we analyze in the assessment is displacement risk. And displacement is defined as the involuntary relocation of residents. And it can be caused by foreclosure, eviction, rent increases, or environmental catastrophe. And the map here shows areas considered vulnerable to displacement. That's in the orange hatching color. And this is based on mostly the change in rents between 2012 and 2017. Again, this is data that's provided for our use in the Fair Housing Assessment. And what's shown here is that areas of San Pablo Avenue are shown to be vulnerable to displacement, and then much of Richmond as well. And this doesn't mean that existing homes are at risk of being torn down or replaced, but because the area contains a larger rental population and rents have been increasing and renters are more vulnerable to those changes in value, the area is considered vulnerable. State law also requires that the sites inventory be analyzed with respect to all of the fair housing indicators in our assessment. And so by comparing the inventory to the fair housing indicators, we analyze whether the sites that are included in the housing element will improve or worsen the fair housing conditions, including patterns of segregation and access to opportunity throughout the city. And based on the recently adopted specific plan, fair housing conditions will likely change the most in the neighborhoods along the San Pablo Avenue corridor. The map here shows the location of the sites inventory in relation to the opportunity areas. And while the city has moderate to high access to opportunities in most neighborhoods, about 58% of the total sites inventory is in the light green low resource areas. And this is due to all of the sites that are within the San Pablo Avenue specific plan. As the city continues to see an increase in mixed income housing along the San Pablo Avenue corridor, that access to opportunity is expected to increase in what's considered right now a low resource area. However, as the housing market strengthens in the city, there is concern that tenants may be priced out and at a greater risk of displacement, since rents and housing prices in the city and the Bay Area have increased rapidly, and developing more affordable housing will provide more options to mitigate displacement. Next, I'm going to talk about the final chapter, chapter 7, which is the housing plan. And the policies in the housing plan are organized around 5 goals. The first is to accelerate housing production, to support affordable and special needs housing, to conserve the existing housing stock and to prevent displacement, to affirmatively further fair housing, and to support energy conservation and sustainable development. While the cities carried over the most successful policies and programs from the existing housing element, the plan also includes 13 new policies and 22 new implementation programs. There are a lot of programs in the housing element. I'm just going to briefly highlight the key programs for each of these 5 goal sections. So starting with goal 1, which is to accelerate the production of housing at all income levels to meet regional housing needs. And there are 5 implementation programs included to achieve this goal. Some of the key implementation programs are Program H1B to promote high density and mixed use development in the San Pablo Avenue specific plan area by providing CEQA streamlining opportunities for projects that are consistent with the specific plan. And then Program H1C is about promoting the development of accessory dwelling units by providing handouts, tools, and resources to homeowners. Goal 2 is to facilitate the development of housing for lower income residents and residents that have special housing needs, including seniors, persons with disabilities, and the unhoused. Some of the key programs in this goal section are Program 2A, to continue to implement and consider potential changes to increase the effectiveness of the inclusionary zoning ordinance. This ordinance requires a certain percentage of new units in market rate housing to be set aside as lower or moderate income. Program 2B establishes priorities, is a program to establish priorities for the distribution of affordable housing trust funds, which are local monies for affordable housing. Program 2C is to explore new local funding sources for affordable housing. Program H2E is to work with BART to develop mixed income housing on BART-owned lands, including El Cerrito Plaza and the Del Norte BART stations. And then Program 2J is a new program to explore the creation of an overlay zone that would provide incentives for affordable housing development on property owned by faith-based institutions. Goal 3 is to conserve and improve the city's existing housing supply and to protect residents from displacement. And there are 6 programs in this goal section. Program 3C is the key tenant protection program under this goal. And this program commits the city to reviewing the data that's collected through the rent registry and to annually evaluate the effectiveness of current tenant protections. And then based on the evaluation, the city would consider the potential for additional tenant protections such as relocation assistance, mediation, or other eviction protections. Goal 4 is to affirmatively further fair housing. And then the final goal, goal 5, is to promote energy conservation. I'll just highlight a couple programs under the fair housing goal section, which are programs 4C and 4D. 4C commits the city to collaborating with the Housing Authority on a campaign to educate landlords about their obligation to accept Section 8 housing choice vouchers under state fair housing laws, and to encourage landlords in higher resource, mostly the single family neighborhoods, to actively participate in the housing choice voucher program. And then through program 4D, the city will will review best practices related to Community Opportunity to Purchase Act or a similar policy that would enhance tenant protections and increase opportunities for community ownership. So that's a brief overview of some of the key programs in the housing plan. There's a lot more in there, and we encourage you to read the plan and provide your comments. Before we wrap up tonight, I want to touch on the next steps in the process. After tonight's workshop, we'll be presenting the draft housing element to the City Council on August 16th, as we mentioned. And then following the City Council meeting, we will be revising the draft housing element based on public comments that we receive and feedback from the City Council, and submitting a revised draft to the state, to HCD, for their review. The state has 90 days for their first review and then 60 days for each subsequent review. So we expect that process to take at least 6 months to make revisions to address the state's comments. But then we will be bringing back a final revised housing element to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption. Every time we make revisions and resubmit to the state, we'll be publishing those versions and track changes on the website, and we'll be updating the public. So you can stay tuned to all of the changes that are made throughout the process. And then finally, I think on this next slide, we have a link to the project webpage where you can find a copy of the housing element, and the email address is here for the city staff where you can submit written comments. And again, the public review period ends on August 29th. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Matt Geldman, to open up the meeting for questions and comments.
Thank you, Chelsea, and for walking us through all of that information. I did just put a link to the project website in the chat in case that's easier for you to take note of, as well as the email address and deadline, just so there's another way for people to view that. And then we can go ahead and start with comments and questions. I see we do already have one in the chat. We don't have a whole lot of people here tonight, so I think we can keep this pretty free flowing, but just a reminder to try and stay on topic and make sure everyone has a chance to speak tonight. If you do want to share some comments or ask a question over Zoom, we encourage you to do that and unmute yourself. First by raising your hand, so we have an order to go through. And everyone gets turn, and then we'll just take you one at a time. But I think you should be able to unmute yourself if you're interested in providing comments. Maybe before we go to that, I do see we have a comment in the chat from Sherry, and I will read it out here. The comment is, it appears that residents most impacted by the housing shortage are the least represented in terms of responses to the surveys and workshops. Why do you think the outreach, as you described, was not more successful? So a good question and a challenge for the project. And I think, Aisa, you're going to give us a response to that. Thank you.
Hi, Sherry. Yes, we did a lot of outreach. More specifically, we did do outreach to our affordable housing projects. We did additional outreach to churches. We also extended the survey past the 4th of July event. So that gave us an opportunity to participate, get some additional feedback during 4th of July, and just to continue to let the community know. And the flyer was available in all 3 languages, as well as the survey. So we did as best as we could. And of course, we always encourage any of our community to also share the survey with any networks that they have.
Thank you. And I see we do have a hand up from Max. If you're there and would like to provide a comment, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. And just first of all, I wanted to commend the city staff and the consultant for putting together a great housing element. I thought it was pretty easy to read compared to other documents I've read. So I thought you all did a great job. So the first question I had was, I was looking at the 2015 through 2023 RENA allocation, so the prior housing element allocation, and we saw the pretty common thread for other Bay Area agencies where we didn't meet our goal for the very low income or the low or the moderate income. So I was wondering if someone either from the consultant team or city staff could explain for the new housing element that we have, what are we going to do to make sure we meet those goals, and what are the strategies the city's going to implement so we can have a little more accountability so we meet those goals?
Thanks, Matt. I can maybe just jump off on this question, and you guys can, anyone else can feel free to chime in. But yeah, good question, Matt. On a lot of the lower income units, it does require generally some funding and support and subsidies. The city's been in an unfortunate position to actually secure funding to actually build more deeply affordable housing units. And with the upcoming BART project, that's actually going to provide a lot of our lower income, but it is something that we are constantly working with nonprofit developers to get more funding. And that's where also our in lieu fees are going to come into effect, so that we can then in turn provide some more local subsidies to make a project in more of a competitive basis.
I'd love to add on to that. This is Melanie, the Community Development Director. So this is something that's kind of a regional and state issue, right? It requires a lot of subsidy. And Aisha, you were just telling me today, the new Bay Area, you can go
Housing Finance Agent.
The Bay Area Housing Finance Agency is looking at putting a multi-billion-dollar bond measure together to help with it. But what I can share, and I think it's surprising and people don't realize it, but for example, Bridge Affordable Housing was entitled at the same time as the market rate. It could have gone first. We didn't know which one would go first. So we would have loved for the affordable. In fact, we would have loved for them to go concurrently, because it's obviously less disruptive for everyone. But instead, we've been working along with Bridge, the nonprofit affordable housing developer, now for 3 years to try to pull together the financing, and we're expecting it by the end of December. So this is kind of I think a problem for us all to be aware of at the state level. Like, we have put tremendous resources into trying to get that money, despite the fact that we all know that level is under delivered in all cities. So I think it's something really to be aware of, is that those monies and the state's budget and the regional budget really needs to make those, I think, streamline the availability of tax credits. But it's taken multiple funding sources to pull that together, and the BART project will as well. In fact, it's beginning to apply already starting in February. So obviously building 60 housing units is an expensive proposition, and I'm just thinking, how can that be more front loaded? Right? How can it be, once we have an entitled project, how could that financing been available? We've had it entitled for going on 4 years, since 2018, right, Sean? I think is when those entitlements were approved. So we, the city was ready for that project to move right into the construction phase, but it's very hard to get the financing together. But thanks for the question.
Awesome. And I do see we have another comment/question in the chat, and I'll read that as well for us to discuss and respond to. So it says, in goal H5, I see no energy generation and storage initiatives. In recent times, how many units have been built without any solar rooftop generation or battery storage? Why?
I can take that one, unless Sean or Aisha you want to. So in this housing element, because as you can see, just getting production, it's very focused on production, and then on incentivizing other energy efficiency measures. The California Green Building Code does require that new multifamily is all built to be solar ready, but we didn't impose any new regulations requiring anything to go further. So it's a much more incentive based in the housing element, because the housing element is focused on trying to get production. And so increasing the cost of that at the city of El Cerrito level is hard, but the building code does require that it's all ready, it's all wired to be able to receive those. So I think we actually had a conversation with Marin Clean Energy recently about how can they also help new development really go the extra step and be able to put those other generating solar and other things together. So I think that is the level, is making that funding really available so that it isn't an extra, so that we're not doing it just through regulation, but we're doing it through incentivizing and funding. And anybody else can chime in there. Sean already said it.
All right. Did you want to add something, Aisa, or should we move on?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. All right, and I don't see any other comments in the chat. If anyone has anything else they'd like to share, comments or questions via Zoom or in the chat, we'll stay for a minute or so longer. If not, we don't need to stay. And I do see a couple of hands popping up, which is great. So we'll start with you, Jeff. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you. I'm Jeff Levin, Policy Director with East Bay Housing Organization and a 33-year resident of El Cerrito now. First of all, thanks for a really good and clear presentation. And from what I have seen so far, a well-organized housing element. This just came out Friday and we haven't had a chance to really go through it in detail, but it seems to be a pretty high caliber. I want to call attention to a few things. The presentation noted concern about high displacement risk along the San Pablo corridor, particularly because that's where a lot of development is going to take place, which could change market conditions and cause rents to increase. There are some policies in the housing element to deal with that, but they're pretty far out in terms of the timeline, and we are concerned about that. As well as the fact that many of the actions in the action plan talk about evaluate, consider, study. Those are not actions, and the state's guidance on the housing element actually cautions against using statements like that without something more definitive. There is a, let's see, policy H2A, evaluation of the inclusionary zoning ordinance, but that would not happen until 2026. Consideration of new funding sources for affordable housing, which I think will be critical to meeting the lower income housing goals. And we understand the fiscal constraints the city is under. But again, that identifies identification of one new funding source by 2026. That's more than halfway through the housing element period. Similarly, consideration of tenant protection measures is pushed out to 2028. By which time many of the displacement pressures could already have taken effect. Some of these things really need to be put up more at the front end, especially the tenant protection stuff, to make sure that we are putting in place policies to protect tenants before we engage in the kinds of development activities that might actually cause displacement. And lastly, I so far have not seen this in there, but would love to see some consideration of adoption of demolition protections consistent with the requirements of SB 330, particularly to make sure that lower income housing units, and that includes units that are just, quote, naturally occurring, are protected and have to be replaced if demolished and so on. Really think that needs to be included as part of the program. I'm sure we will have other comments during the comment period once we get a chance to look through it. But again, thanks so much for a really great presentation tonight.
Thank you for your comments. Those are all great, and we appreciate you sharing all that. I don't know if we need to respond and at this time, but yeah. And I see Max, you have your hand up again, which is great. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I had another question really kind of related to ADUs and other kind of development. So I didn't see SB 9 mentioned in the housing element. I was wondering if there could be a response on what does the city see the role of SB9 on meeting some of these needs? Does the city think there's not much potential with SB9 with our particular city, or it'd just be good to hear some consideration for that?
That is a great question.
Sean, do you want to take that one? Are you, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can touch a little bit on SB9. So yeah, we have started to see some interest in SB9 since it's been adopted. I think, you know, SB9 is going to apply to our single family zones in El Cerrito. And so it, you know, while you know, it definitely could be utilized. It remains to be seen a little bit how much it will be utilized and how many units will actually result from the adoption of SB9. I'm not sure. I'm not certain yet. I mean, it's been you know, it's been a while since it's been adopted now, or you know, we've had 6 months since it's been adopted. We've seen some interest. We've gotten a lot of inquiries, but we've yet to get an SB9 application in. So, you know, we probably will start to see that happen. You know, I'm hopefully we'll start to see that happen eventually, but it hasn't yet. And so, you know, I'm not certain how much opportunity that actually presents right now at this time.
And Chelsea, can you, when in the housing inventory with SB9, and it mostly probably taking place in our kind of single family or medium neighborhoods, most of those would be counted as what? I know it's like Sean said, we don't anticipate, you know, more than you know, not even a dozen a year. I mean, I think we expect a handful at best. But again, how those are counted, how those were included.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't include any projection of SB9 units in the sites inventory because of the lack of a trend related to this. You know, the state, if you make a projection that something's going to happen, you have to base it on evidence. Like the projection of accessory dwelling units has to be based on past building permit trends. And because the city doesn't yet have any SB9 approvals, there wouldn't be anything to base that projection on. So I think it's something to wait and see, and then perhaps in the next housing element cycle, there could be an inclusion of that projection.
But when the legislation was passed and an evaluation of cities was looked at, we were not considered, it wasn't considered that it was going to be a significant increase in housing production in El Cerrito.
But I'll just add too, I mean, we will nonetheless count, you know, any units that are produced pursuant to SB9, we will count those in our annual general plan progress report, where we are required to do a tally of units that have been produced, you know, in the last calendar year. So they will count towards these, you know, our housing production numbers. Even though we don't at this time have a very good indicator of what that might be going into the future.
All right, thanks for the responses and the great question. Robin Mitchell, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. This is actually howdy gowdy, but I wanted to, you know, second the comments that Jeff made, particularly about more, you know, well, stronger language in the policies, and actually, you know, aspiring to do some policies that are not just relying on other programs and activities that we kind of piggyback on, but actually try to, you know, review, you know, our situation and try to figure out how to improve it. For instance, you know, it was pointed out that, you know, the past cycle didn't meet the RENA, whereas the current one is projected to have, you know, double the units that it has to have, which is great if that happens. But I think if we look at the trajectory, even with approved projects, you know, maybe a quarter of those are being built. And so it seems like there needs to be at least the understanding in these projections that it's based on, what we've seen in the past, and maybe we can't expect all of this to happen, even though we would like it to, and then try to come up with policies that are actually going to make it more likely to happen, because a lot of our past affordable housing was dependent on the redevelopment, and bulk of our future affordable housing is dependent on BART. Those are great, and we're lucky to have all those opportunities for affordable housing, but it remains to be seen whether we can produce it without those entities. So I hope there'll be some broader thinking about how to address some of these potential shortfalls. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sherry.
Yes, I'm going to just follow up on a question I put in the chat, which was about displacement also. I mean, I'm very concerned about tenants. I've been concerned for a long time in this city. I've watched a lot of displacement happening with families, especially near this San Pablo area. And I don't know what kind of it feels like there are policies that could probably be implemented if there was actual more, I want to say more thought to it, and thinking about unintended outcomes that happen in some of the development that's going on. I looked at the BART project and I thought it was great. I was looking at the whole area, and I was thinking about, oh, a park here, and then there's a Liberty Street, but then thinking about the people I know in that area and the community and who's living there, and about how lucrative it will be for landlords to actually do substantial rehabs and remove tenants from that area and then upgrade it. And I guess you spoke about that in your report, and I think your data is really good and it's really clear. But what feels not clear, and that's why I was asking, what are the good policies that we can put in place to really stop displacement and support people, and not relocation assistance, because relocation is going to be like to where, another city? I don't think that's necessarily enough. So I just wanted to make those comments so it's on record that I'm really concerned about the displacement of tenants in our community.
Thank you for elaborating on your chat comments. I was going to get there, so thank you for getting us there. And I don't know if anyone wants to respond or anything, but I think we'll take that into consideration as we move forward in the process here. Any other comments or questions this evening? Appreciate you all participating, sharing your thoughtful comments and questions, and especially those of you who have had a chance to dive into the document a little bit in the short time that it's been available. All right, maybe one more last call before we sign off here.
Well, I want to speak a bit to Sherry's just briefly. I mean, obviously, by building new ones, we are aiming, of course, to increase the number of units that are actually available to lower income families and individuals. And that's different, I know, than the issue that Sherry's bringing up, which is existing residents. We hope, and when we were doing our affordable housing strategy, that the increase in supply, we know that there was a lot of pressure on those units prior, when there was not enough, when there's more jobs than housing, then those with the higher incomes were beginning to get the scarce units. So we do hope that the increase in supply helps take some of that pressure off. And as Sherry knows, and Aisa could speak more to, we did have the Tenant Protection Task Force also kind of looking at this issue. So it is an important issue, and we do know, I think that Ascent did a good job of talking about how more increasing housing in the San Pablo Avenue area will bring more diverse incomes closer to the higher resource areas, but then the corollary of that you're talking about, Sherry, is those higher resource areas become more desirable. What do owners do? So I think it is an ongoing conversation that we need to have. So I just want to note that we've heard it, and it's something to keep thinking of. And we do think supply is overall going to improve the availability of housing at all income levels, but that doesn't necessarily address the direct problem that you're talking about. But I think it's one that needs to keep being creatively discussed and thought of. So I just wanted to not pass it. I don't know what the solution is, but I think it's a important conversation to keep having.
Thank you, Melanie. All right. Anybody else have any other thoughts, ideas, comments, suggestions, or questions? Last call, going once, 2 times, 3 times. All right. Well, thanks again for participating and attending this evening. I'll turn it over to Sean for some concluding remarks.
Great, thanks, Matt. Yeah, I also want to say thank you everybody who's joined us tonight. Thanks for your comments. This feedback has been really helpful. If you do have additional comments, if you think of things after you leave here tonight, or if you know people that might want to give us comments as well that couldn't attend tonight, there are a few ways to do that. So you can email your comments to planning@ci.el-cerrito.ca.us. We're accepting comments through August 29th. And the draft housing element is available at that website that's listed on the screen there. So please tell folks that who weren't able to join us tonight that they can access the document there as well. The URL is the city's website, el-cerrito.org/housing element 2023. And the city council will be discussing the draft housing element at their meeting on August 16th. So if you would like to attend that meeting and speak during public comment or submit a comment to the council, you're welcome to do that as well. And then if we could go to the next slide. So I just wanted to reiterate some of the other upcoming dates that we have. So on August 17th, which is 2 weeks from Wednesday, we are having a joint Planning Commission Design Review Board meeting where the Planning Commission will receive comments on the draft of the supplemental environmental impact report for the San Pablo Avenue specific plan update, as well as the joint body will also consider comments on the plan update itself. So if that's something that you're interested in, the future development of San Pablo Avenue and continuing the city's ongoing efforts along San Pablo Avenue, please come to that meeting. Additionally, at the both of these meetings are at 7:30. I should have put that on here. Additionally, on September 7th, what would be the normal design review board meeting, there will be a joint meeting of the Design Review Board and Planning Commission to review an initial concept plan for the El Cerrito Plaza BART Station TOD project. So if you're interested in that project, please come to that meeting as well. The safety element process hasn't started yet, but we will be doing outreach for that process once we do commence that. And then just in conclusion, I just again wanted to thank everybody. I just wanted to share I was talking to a customer today who was we were just talking about the development process in California, and he was saying that the people that tend to come to meetings are the people that do come to meetings are the existing residents of a community, and not obviously the future residents that you're often planning for. And I just want to say, I think, in the comments that have been given here tonight, I've really noted that people are, in addition to your own housing concerns and your own housing needs. I think people have been really thoughtful in trying to anticipate our future housing needs. And that really is our charge here with the housing element, is to plan for the future and to try to plan for the needs of the next thousands of people who will be residents of El Cerrito, and for whom an El Cerrito address will hopefully serve them well. So we again thank everybody for your time tonight and your comments, and we look forward to receiving any additional comments that you might have.